I had always believed that my marriage was strong. The foundation was built on love, trust, and shared experiences that made us seem inseparable. My husband and I had been together for years, and everything seemed perfect. We had our own little world, routine dinners, quiet weekends, and those late-night conversations about our dreams and future. We laughed about how we had come to this point in life, content with everything we had. Life felt predictable, comfortable, and for a while I thought it was all I needed. We were in sync, or at least I thought we were. But then, something started to change, and at first it was so subtle I didn't even notice. It wasn't dramatic or shocking, just small shifts. He would come home late more often, or sometimes he'd be distracted during our time together. His eyes no longer held that familiar spark. Conversations became shorter, and I noticed his attention wandering. I shrugged it off at first, assuming he was just tired from work or maybe stressed about something he didn't want to share. I didn't want to assume the worst, so I convinced myself it was just a phase. After all, we had been through so much together. We were both in our 30s, juggling careers and family, so maybe this was just the natural course of life. However, the distance between us seemed to grow. I would catch him glancing at his phone more often, turning the screen away whenever I walked by, his fingers typing rapidly, as if he were in a rush to reply. Little things, like his lack of interest in our usual weekend walks or his sudden change in how he talked about work, raised suspicions, but I didn't want to believe my gut. He was my husband, the person I trusted more than anyone else. Yet, something was undeniably off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. One evening, I decided to confront him, not out of suspicion, but because I couldn't ignore the distance anymore. I asked him if something was wrong, if there was something bothering him that he hadn't told me. His response was calm, maybe too calm, like he was trying to reassure me, but the words felt hollow. He told me everything was fine, that I was overthinking things, and that he just had a lot on his plate lately. But there was something in his voice, something that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the reassurance I expected. It was a forced effort to avoid the topic, a defensive tone that made me doubt his honesty. I pushed it aside again, because who wants to doubt their partner? Who wants to believe that their marriage might not be what they thought it was? But that nagging feeling didn't go away. Days passed, and I found myself becoming hyper-aware of everything he did. How late he stayed at work. The strange look in his eyes when I asked him about his day. His behavior started to seem less like normal routine, and more like a pattern I couldn't ignore. Each day, I found myself searching for answers I wasn't ready to find. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, overthinking a situation that wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be. But then there were the little things that didn't seem like a big deal at first, but when added together, told a different story. One evening, I noticed a faint scent of perfume on his shirt. It wasn't my scent. It wasn't even one I recognized. He claimed it was from a colleague, a woman at work who had spilled something on him. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the explanation didn't feel right. It wasn't just the perfume, though. It was the fact that his phone was buzzing with texts every night at strange hours, his face lighting up when he saw the name of the sender, someone I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to confront the possibility that the life I thought was perfect was actually unraveling before me. Still, I couldn't ignore the signs. The woman's name on his phone was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. She wasn't someone he ever mentioned, which only made me more suspicious. It was subtle but unmistakable, a kind of coldness that wasn't just about work or stress. There was a distance in his eyes that didn't have an explanation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being kept in the dark. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things. Maybe I was, but then again, maybe I wasn't. The thought of confronting him again made me anxious, terrified of what I might find. Was I prepared to face the truth? What if I was wrong? But how could I ignore the little pieces falling into place? The trust one had built my life on was slowly crumbling, and I felt powerless to stop it. The more I tried to push my suspicions aside, the clearer they became. I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the unexplained phone calls. They weren't just coincidences anymore. I started to feel like I was living in a house of mirrors, where nothing was as it seemed, and every reflection distorted the truth I was desperately trying to hold on to. It wasn't just the small signs anymore, it was the weight of everything that had shifted between us. I became obsessed with the idea of finding answers, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth. My mind was running in circles, each thought contradicting the other. Was I paranoid, or was I just finally seeing what was right in front of me? I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but every time he walked out the door or got a message, I couldn't help but wonder what he was really doing. It was a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my husband, and it made me question my own judgment. I couldn't help but think about the way he had been acting. When I'd asked him about his day, he gave me short, vague responses. There was no longer the enthusiasm in his voice when he spoke about work or our plans for the future. He seemed emotionally distant, like he was somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't invited. And his phone. That damn phone. Every night, after we'd eat dinner, he'd disappear into the bathroom for long stretches of time, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. The same phone that now buzzed nonstop. Never in my presence. I began to wonder if the woman he was texting had become a more significant part of his life than he had ever let on. Was this just an emotional affair, or was there more to it? And how could I possibly confront him when I didn't have the full picture? The truth is, I didn't want to believe what my instincts were telling me. I didn't want to tear apart the life we had built, even if it was starting to crumble. But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He had become distant in ways I couldn't ignore. There were times when he would leave the room abruptly or avoid eye contact when I mentioned anything personal. It was like he was hiding something I wasn't supposed to know. The moment I confronted him, everything changed. I had gathered enough courage to face the truth, to ask the questions I had been avoiding for weeks. His eyes shifted as soon as I brought it up, the subtle guilt in his expression unmistakable. I held up the receipt in front of him, my hands shaking slightly, and demanded an explanation. At first, he tried to brush it off, dismissing it as nothing. He said it was just a work dinner, that he'd forgotten to mention it because it wasn't anything important. But the way he said it didn't match his body language. The nervousness in his voice, the way he avoided eye contact, told me everything I needed to know. His words were empty, and I could see the cracks in his carefully constructed story. I pressed him harder, unable to hold back anymore. I needed to hear the truth, no matter how painful it was. And then, he cracked. He didn't come out and say it directly, but his hesitation, his unwillingness to meet my gaze, gave it away. After a long silence, he finally admitted it. There was someone else. He hadn't just gone to dinner for work. It was with her. Someone he had met recently. Someone who had become more than just a casual acquaintance. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I could barely breathe as the words sunk in. The man I had trusted with my entire life, the man I had built a future with, had been seeing someone else behind my back. It was everything I feared and more. He tried to explain himself, to apologize, but his words felt like poison. Nothing he said could undo the damage. He told me how he was confused, how he hadn't meant for things to go this far, but it didn't matter. The betrayal was still there, hanging in the air between us like a thick fog. My mind was racing, but I couldn't process what he was saying. All I could focus on was the sickening feeling in my stomach, the overwhelming realization that my entire life had been built on a lie. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. The pain was so sharp that it was hard to think straight, hard to even stand in front of him. I wanted to scream, to yell at him for what he had done, but I couldn't. My emotions were all tangled up inside me, anger, sadness, confusion, betrayal, and I couldn't find the words to express it. I had never felt so small, so helpless. The trust one had given him had been shattered, and all I could do was stand there, frozen, as he continued to apologize. His voice became a distant echo as I tried to process what had just been revealed. It wasn't just that he had been seeing someone else. It was the fact that he had been lying to me for so long, that he had been hiding things, pretending like everything was fine while slowly breaking apart the foundation of our marriage. I felt like a fool. All those times I had questioned him, doubted my own instincts, and he had been lying to my face. He had made me feel crazy for even suspecting something. And now, here I was standing in front of him, trying to make sense of a reality that didn't seem real. His apologies continued, but they didn't mean anything to me anymore.
How could they?
How could his words undo the hurt he had caused? I wanted to cry, to break down, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stood there, staring at him as if he were a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. The man I had loved so deeply was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen to betray everything we had built. In that moment, I realized that no amount of apologies or explanations would fix what had been broken. I had questions, so many questions, but none of them felt important anymore. What difference would it make to know how long this affair had been going on, or whether he truly regretted it? The damage had been done. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to forgive him, and the thought of trying to fix our marriage seemed impossible. How could I trust him again? How could I look at him the same way when the person I thought he was no longer existed? The truth had shattered everything, and I was left standing in the aftermath, trying to make sense of the wreckage. He was still talking, still apologizing, but his voice barely registered. I couldn't hear him anymore.
All I could hear was the sound of my heart breaking. I didn't know what to say.
I didn't know how to respond to the man standing in front of me, the man I had trusted, now nothing more than a stranger. The revelation hit harder than anything I could have prepared for. I had always thought that if this moment ever came, I would have answers ready, a plan in place for what to do next. But now, in the wake of his admission, all I felt was a profound emptiness. The person I had loved, who I thought knew me better than anyone else, had torn apart everything we had built with a single act of betrayal. It didn't matter how much he apologized, how much he begged for forgiveness. It felt like too little, too late. I could hear his voice, his desperate attempts to explain himself, but the words didn't register. They felt like noise. It wasn't that I didn't care what he had to say. It was that his words no longer held any weight. How could they? I had given him my trust, my love, my everything. And he had thrown it all away for someone else. The thought of trying to fix what had been broken seemed impossible. How could we go back to the way things were? How could I look at him the same way, knowing what he had done? I wanted to shout, to scream at him, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. The pain felt like it was eating me alive, but I couldn't express it. I didn't know how to process the overwhelming mix of hurt and anger. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk out the door, and never look back. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still cared about him, despite everything, wanted to find some way to work through this. But I knew deep down that something fundamental had shifted. There was no going back from this. I asked him what he thought would happen now. Was he expecting me to forgive him? Was he thinking that his apology would somehow make everything okay? His answer was vague, filled with regret, but it didn't matter. It was clear to me that he didn't fully understand the depth of what he had done. He was sorry, yes, but that didn't erase the years of trust that had been shattered in an instant. He told me he was confused, that he hadn't meant for it to get this far, but the reality was that it had. And there was no undoing it. The damage was done. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As I stood there, a part of me was still holding on, still hoping that we could somehow find a way to repair the damage. But I knew that it wasn't realistic. He had betrayed me in a way that made it impossible to simply forget or move on. The idea of reconciliation seemed like a distant dream, a fantasy that had no place in the reality of what we were facing. The trust we had once shared was gone, and no amount of remorse could ever bring it back. I thought about the life we had built together, the plans, the promises, the shared moments that now felt like lies. I had invested so much in this relationship, believed in it with every fiber of my being. And now, it felt like it was all crumbling. The love I had given him, the love I had believed was reciprocated, felt like it had been taken for granted. How could I trust him again? How could I allow myself to believe in anything he said when he had already proven that he was capable of this kind of deception? At that moment, I realized that the